Okay, we'll go ahead and get started, and if anyone else joins us, welcome. So welcome to today's webinar on connecting new Canadians to nature in the Greenbelt. My name is Anna Shortley. I'm a research and policy analyst here at the Greenbelt Foundation, and I'm here with Ezgi Taz from the Greenbelt Foundation, Jill Kelly from Park People, and Ashoo and Anand from Valle Conservation. Thank you all for taking the time to join us here today. As you can see, some people, if you're just joining in, you can introduce yourself in the chat. We have quite a diversity of people from across sectors joining us today, so feel free to just say who you are and where you're from. So before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge the situation that we're in right now, COVID-19, and its impacts on how we're going to do outdoor engagement, how people are accessing green spaces right now, obviously with some closures of parks, and with social distancing measures in place and some research suggesting that travel behavior is going to change for the foreseeable future, the way we engage with audiences in nature-based recreation is going to look pretty different this year. But then another thing that's coming up a lot in this situation is just the importance of these spaces and engaging a variety of audiences and increasing their accessibility to nature-based experiences and the outdoors. So while the presentations from today are based on learnings and programs from a pre-COVID context, engaging with new Canadians and with anyone really in outdoor recreation remains very important and will probably become more important as we move into the post-COVID-19 context. So just go through the agenda first. I will start with a presentation on some research that the Greenbelt Foundation undertook last summer and fall that was looking at if and how new Canadians were engaging with nature-based amenities in the Greenbelts and how we can better expand our outreach to them. And then Jill will present on the Into the Greenbelt program run by Park People, and Ashoo from Valle Conservation will share some insights from the programs they do there connecting with new Canadians. Following that, we'll end with a Q&A. We'll have about 10 or 15 minutes for the Q&A. Please use the Q&A box that should be kind of at the top there. As you see, my coworker Jackie is just indicating that this is the question box. You can ask questions throughout the presentation and we'll get to as many as possible at the end. Unfortunately, our fourth presenter, Shannon, Lyon from Parks Canada, was unable to make it. She had a last-minute work scheduling conflict, so apologies for her absence. Given her absence, we'll probably end the webinar a little bit earlier unless we do have a lot of questions to get through. So maybe around 3 we'll end. Okay, so just to jump right back in and give you a little bit of background and context on this project we did. As I said, it was to look at if and how new Canadians are engaging with the Greenbelts and what we can do to improve our outreach. So why we did this project was, well, as I'm sure a number of you are very aware, the GTHA is very diverse. A number of municipalities, their populations are over 50% new Canadians, or nearly 50%. However, while new Canadians are becoming a significant proportion of this region's, as well as the country's and the province's populations more generally, there's some research, some articles, anecdotal evidence that suggested that new Canadians visit parks and outdoor areas less than Canadian-born populations. So this is one of the major findings from this large survey that I have here, the 2012 Canadian Nature Survey. But the survey is a bit out of date now, and it was measuring awareness across the country. So we want to start to get at this question in this region to see if this statement holds true, and if so, what could we do to improve engagement with new Canadian audiences? So to give you a bit of background on the Greenbelt, it's 2 million acres of agriculture and natural heritage. We have a lot of trails. We have the Greenbelt Cycle Route. We have things like the Bruce Trail, the Oak Ridges Moraine Trail, kind of cut across, many conservation areas, parks, wineries, breweries, on-farm markets, all that, a lot of outdoor recreation activities. And it also happens to be right at the doorstep of those municipalities that have large new Canadian populations. So we figured the Greenbelt is well positioned to provide new Canadians with opportunities to engage with nature right by their home. So we commissioned Innovative Research Group to conduct 6 focus groups across the GTA with Chinese New Canadians and South Asian Canadians. The reason we specifically did focus groups with Chinese Canadians and South Asian Canadians is because they are the largest immigrant populations in the region, and those numbers are growing. And just a note on definitions, for the purpose of this research, we're using first generation Canadians to refer to immigrants to Canada. Second generation refers to the children of immigrants to Canada. And so in these focus groups, we are asking questions like, what do you do for fun in your leisure time? And what sort of outdoor experiences have you been having? Do you know what the Greenbelt is? Just to start to get a better sense of what experiences were they having in nature, why were they drawn to those experiences, how did they find out about them, and to measure their general overall awareness of the Greenbelt and its outdoor recreation opportunities. Just an important note, focus groups do not hold the same level of statistical certainty as surveys or quantitative research methods. So the value of these focus groups is really more about the depth of the information from these participants rather than measuring that X number of people holds this view. So the main activity of the focus groups was this mood board activity. So we put together these 3 mood boards using photos that we had of the Greenbelt. And the point of this activity was start to probe any emotional associations, any values, desires, and barriers that come up when participants look at these photos. So we tried to get a variety of photos from depicting a lot of different landscapes and some different outdoor activities just to get some variety. So again, to the key findings from this activity, perhaps the most significant finding is the appeal of water. Water has a strong visual and emotional appeal. We had a lot of participants across all groups talk about how therapeutic water is, how calming it is, how they like the color, and they've indicated they were more willing to make a trip to the Greenbelt if that trip involved visiting a body of water, especially waterfalls. Waterfalls were really well liked in these groups. However, the photo that we gave of the marsh was less appealing. I remember one participant saying that it reminded them of crocodiles. So I'm assuming this participant is not interested in making a trip to Florida. But overall, in general, water, very appealing, emotionally, visually, big selling point. So another finding that came up, a lot of the participants across these groups, especially we found this in the Chinese Canadian focus groups, they didn't necessarily know that these places that were depicted in the photographs were actually that close to where they lived. And they expressed this feeling of missing out on these experiences. So a significant draw to the Greenbelt is that it is an easy opportunity to get out of the city and connect with nature. So in the immigrant Chinese Canadian focus group or first generation group in particular, there's a lot of talk of the value of wanting peace and tranquility in nature. And so seeing these photos were a nice reminder to these participants that there are green spaces in which to recharge and contemplate. In terms of the produce photos, we had some farmers markets, some berry picking photos. Pretty much all the participants across groups indicated support for farmers markets and for fresh produce, but they indicated that this wasn't necessarily a reason they would make a trip to the Greenbelt. They wouldn't necessarily say, I'm gonna go specifically to go buy produce from a farmer's market. Rather, they saw it as a nice addition to a trip they were already making. So if they happened to on a on-farm market on the way back from a hike, that would be great. It would round out their day. Produce picking in particular was a very enticing activity in these focus groups, especially for those with families. Many have positive associations with fruit and fruit picking growing up, and they'd like to share it with their children. It's a great way to keep the children busy, came up a lot. And it also was seen as a good opportunity for those who were less interested in more active things like hiking or cycling. So this is a finding from the Chinese Canadian focus groups in particular was that the photos that showed groups of people were not appealing. The crowds were a deterrent. So there are some associations that came up with disturbance in nature, with pollution. One anecdote that came up quite often in the groups was the experience of Dundas Peak, which I'm sure some of you may have had, where it's a very popular location. You can't even park there anymore, really. You have to take the bus in. There's a lot of crowds. So a number of participants noted that that kind of killed the experience for them, so to speak. In the South Asian Canadians focus groups, they didn't indicate they liked crowds or they liked other groups of people, but they did indicate that they enjoyed camping and picnicking in large groups, especially with their extended families. So across all groups, photos that engage the senses evoke the strongest emotional reactions, especially bright colors, bright greens, bright blues, very appealing, very enticing. And there's also a lot of comments on the sounds of the photo. So participants would note when they're looking at a photo of a waterfall that they could hear the water, or looking at a brook, they can hear the water. And there are also a couple of comments that came up about the silence of the photos, that looking at these photos, they could hear nothing. And that was a very peaceful sentiment for a lot of the participants, especially in contrast to the noisiness of the city. So again, this value of peace and tranquility, and finding that in nature came up quite a bit as a strong value in these groups. So there's several photos that elicited a stronger reaction than others. The caves photo here from Bruce Peninsula, a lot of participants associated that with adventure and mystery. Participants who were looking for that kind of experience were really drawn to this photo. The hawk photo as well was quite appealing to many. There was sort of an excitement about seeing diverse wildlife, and there's an interest in experiencing the wildlife outside the city. However, the photo we had of just sort of general farmland, just this hayfield, was not very inspiring. Remember, one participant said it looked like, a waste of space, or a lot of nothingness, or something like that. This is not to say that they necessarily don't like agriculture, or that these participants didn't like agriculture or agricultural experiences. It's just that there wasn't a sense of how they could engage with this landscape. It's quite different from the reactions to the photos of the farmers market or berry picking, because they could actually see how they would engage with those spaces. So through this activity, we uncovered a number of potential barriers. So again, there's that negative perception of crowds is an issue. Imagery that showed people at all were less appealing than those just depicting the natural elements. Again, this was especially true in the Chinese Canadians focus group. And again, there's those anecdotes of Dundas Peak. I remember one participant said something like, the crowds just killed the serenity of being in nature. So this need to address these overcrowding issues at the very popular locations is not only necessary to protect against degradation of that natural environment, but also to just improve the experience of visitors, especially those who are looking for experiences in nature because they want to calm down or find peace. So again, there's that comment about Instagrammers in particular came up a lot, a little bit of didn't quite like the Instagrammers. So then the other barrier was access knowledge. So aside from those very well, advertised sites like Dundas Peak, participants didn't necessarily know where to go in the Greenbelt, particularly where were trail access points and where's parking, where can I park my car? And that would make it difficult when planning a trip when you don't know where you're going exactly. So one participant had suggested, more group educational trips would be a way to start to get at this barrier. A couple other barriers, something that was mentioned across some of the focus groups was that their parents would not be interested in joining them on these experiences. So a couple had noted there's a bit of a generational gap, that their parents grew up with, or when they came here, they did not have as much leisure time as their kids do now, or new immigrants do now. So there just isn't really a sense of doing these sorts of leisure activities. So again, that education piece is necessary to encourage those sorts of trips. Limited access to washrooms came up as an issue quite a bit. Particularly, this was, again, the Chinese Canadian focus group. They wanted to have more information ahead of time about what kind of washrooms were available, and what was the quality of those washrooms when planning the trip. And finally, overcoming allergies, particularly to mosquitoes, is a barrier to actually genuinely enjoying these experiences. Final potential barrier, and maybe an opportunity, is promoting wintertime activities. So in our mood boards, we didn't show any photos of people engaging in the Greenbelt in the winter, like this photo we have here. It was all, warm weather activities. But a lot of participants indicated enjoying activities like skiing or snowboarding, or something that came up quite a bit, surprisingly to me, was ice fishing on Lake Simcoe. Those were all experiences that the participants indicating enjoying or would enjoy, but with no representation of these winter activities. They may not consider the Greenbelt a destination for leisure time in the winter. It may only exist as a warm weather destination. And finally, other warm weather activities that we didn't demonstrate in those mood boards, like fishing. That was another activity that came up as being desirable, but they didn't know if that was an activity that they could do, and it's not associated with the Greenbelt. So after exploring our mood boards, we asked them to create their own mood boards in pairs. So we asked them to bring together the photos that were the most appealing to them and gave them the strongest impression of the Greenbelt. So there are a couple photos that consistently appeared across all groups in the mood board creation activity. So images of water were by far the most selected. This is not surprising, particularly, again, those photos of waterfalls. One participant I remember in particular said that adding a photo of water was a no-brainer. It had to be in there. Most participants did include some form of an edible experience, either the farmer's market photo or the berry picking photo, or both. The hawk image and the cave image, of course, resonated again with a lot of people. And finally, there was an inclusion of biking, especially as a preferred mode of transportation to get to these experiences. So several participant pairs, we also encourage them to envision their ideal journey through the Greenbelt. So what we found is that participants were starting to put together a lot of different experiences to fill up either a day trip or a multi-day trip. So they were including multiple elements, multiple sceneries, and they found it to be particularly engaging. So for example, participants, when describing what they would do, would say something like, okay, we're going to start off the day with a trail or a bike ride, then we're going to go berry picking, and then we're going to go to a farmer's market and buy wine and local honey, and then we're going to go to the caves, and then we're going to spend a night in a cottage with a nice washroom, a nice bathroom. So what we learned for this activity is that there is, in these ideal journeys, there are multiple elements to the trip. It's not just, I'm going to take a trip to do a hike and then go home. There is a desire to combine these different activities into one trip. So finally, moving on to just some overall findings and engagement opportunities. What we found through these focus groups is that a lot of the participants had been to the Greenbelt. They had gone to see the waterfalls in Hamilton. They have hiked the trail. They have gone ice fishing maybe, but they didn't know necessarily they were in the Greenbelt. There was not as much familiarity with the Greenbelt itself, though they were engaging with it. So the initial assumption we had going into this research that, oh, these groups are underrepresented in the Greenbelt, it did not hold true for these focus groups. And while some had admitted that the outdoor activities are stereotypically coded as white, This was not representative of their actual experience in the Greenbelt, and they recall making a diverse makeup of people in their experiences of the Greenbelt. So going back to leisure is seldom a solo activity. So one difference between the two different focus groups and the Chinese Canadian focus groups, there was more discussion about doing these activities with friends or with a partner, whereas in the South Asian community or focus group, there's more of an emphasis on family or community. But the more key difference between these audiences was around the household structure, so whether you had kids or not. And those with kids were actively seeking and willing to travel for novel activities that would keep their kids busy for a full day. And children are that main consideration when planning leisure activities among parents. So in terms of actually outreaching to these audiences, social media plays a large role in determining leisure activities across all groups. And I think this is not surprising. I think social media plays a large role for anyone nowadays. So word of mouth is a large determinant of leisure choice. By extension, seeing posts on social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram really motivates taking a trip. As well as some other sites that were mentioned were BlogTO or All Trails, maybe for some more specific recommendations for restaurants or for a specific trail, as well as certain Facebook groups like mom groups or biking groups would be sources of information. But as we noted with those issues of overcrowding at those places that are very well advertised, like again, I have Dundas Peak here on the slide, very well advertised on social media. The excessive popularity of some places may lead to a worse experience for patrons. So there may be an opportunity to use social media to spread out the attention a bit more so that there isn't overcrowding at certain places, or less overcrowding. A couple other engagement channels were mentioned, specifically in the immigrant or first generation Chinese Canadians focus groups. WeChat, this website called York BBS, Chinese supermarkets, and post-secondary institutions were noted as sources of information. And then the South Asian Canadian focus group indicated that the many cultural and community events that occur across the GTA are good points of engagement, as well as language centers or cricket community groups were mentioned. Okay, so I'll end my presentation there. Thank you all for listening. I look forward to the questions at the end, and I'll pass it over to Jill Kelly from Park People.
Thanks so much, Anna. I'm just going to bring up my computer, so bear with me here, guys. Apologies. All right. All right, thanks. Sorry, we had to do a little juggling of computers and bringing up information. Hope everybody can see. Again, welcome and thanks again for coming today. Obviously, I'd like to take a minute and thank everybody for doing what you're doing to stay healthy and keeping your community safe. I feel that access to green space and parks has never seemed more important for people, as Anna mentioned, in light of COVID. And I'm looking forward to the day when we can all get together again and enjoy our green space together. Sorry, I'm gonna move my clicker. All right. As Anna mentioned, my name is Jill Kelly, and I am a project manager with Park People. For those that don't know who Park People is, we're a national charity that's all about supporting community groups in animating and programming their neighborhood parks. I joined the team in 2018, and I'm primarily responsible for partnership development and program development across the GTHA. Oh, sorry, computer is being slow. Oh, that's weird. Oh, sorry. Not sure what's happened here and why my computer has decided to not advance the slides. All right, there we go. Sorry. Oh, and now it's going crazy. Okay, it's like on its own little thing. One sec. I apologize, everybody. Let's bring that back. Nothing like technology to mess with us. All right, so we're all about supporting vibrant parks, and by that, we really mean that parks that are animated for the community and that meet community needs and are supporting really the communities that they serve. We feel that vibrant parks are well designed and maintained for those communities, and we help by supporting parks in 5 key ways through grants and funding to small community groups. We also lead policy and research on park best practices, as well as some knowledge and sharing through resources and piloting new programs. Going to try again. There we go. And by that, it's also our network. And our national network is made up of over 850 community groups, park groups across the country. And of those groups, we've supported them in engaging over 3,000 community events. And also investing through strong partnerships and collaborations, over $6 million in park investments. So the Into the Greenbelt program, which is what we're going to be focusing and talking about today, that was a collaboration with ourselves and the Greenbelt Foundation, which started in 2017, and it sort of came about in addition to the Greenbelt River Valley Connector program, which we help and run in collaboration with the Greenbelt Foundation. And that sort of came about in 2017. The Greenbelt was expanded, for those that know, south down into more of our urban areas, connecting the rural to Lake Ontario through 21 urban river valleys and 7 coastal wetlands. And so we came on board to work with the foundation to first do a bit of a landscape scan to find out what other groups are doing in their urban river valleys in terms of programming and what potentials there could be for collaboration and engagement, community-based collaboration that would engage people in animating and programming their urban river valleys. This also led to us launching and taking on Into the Greenbelt program, the administration piece, which is a travel bursary program that allows new Canadians and those from underserved communities in Toronto an opportunity to go out into the Greenbelt and explore on a day trip. And so there's an opportunity to explore 10 different Greenbelt destinations. And once my computer presentation is stopped, I'll share the link to the brochure in the chat window. I don't want to jinx my computer right now and before it explodes. And the bursaries are intended to cover half of the travel expenses for a group of about 25 to 40. It's a bus trip. And again, this is again in a pre-COVID context where people could gather en masse. And since we started taking over the program, we've engaged, or over 14,000 people have experienced Greenbelt sites. So for us, and I mean, this is kind of a personal question, but keys to success for me is really about adapting and responding to community needs. You'll see here some of the pictures of past trips. The picture on the left is a youth-based organization that serves new Canadian youth. And then on the right is a group from the Arab Community Center in Toronto, enjoying a nice picnic. So again, it's really about, for us, success is about responding to the community needs and adapting and having strong partners on the ground that can help with the outreach, but also help by reducing as many barriers for people to participate. So that the travel bursary provides a way to reduce some of those barriers from a financial standpoint, but it's also important to have strong partners and community connections on the ground to help with things like translation and helping to ensure things feel safe to people. And also really, so that really helps build that layer of trust and understanding. And for us, this program is really about mobilizing and supporting people then take on the leadership role to coordinate their own trips. We give them the tools and the resources to do so, and a bit of the financial support, but really helping them plan their own field trip for their community group. And again, kind of going back to that whole aspect of having strong partnerships and layering different connections, Park People runs two separate programs in neighborhood improvement areas within Toronto, both our Sparking Change program and our Walk in the Park program. The Sparking Change program is, again, it's a capacity building program that's all about supporting community leaders and giving them the tools and resources to run their own park-based events. The picture on the left is from a community swap that was held last year in Flemington off the Don River. And the idea behind that is we provide some small scale funding in a lot of capacity building. So we help them coordinate their own events, help them get park permits, and helping them along the way to sort of get up and going and navigate so that they can engage their community in outdoor activities. The Walk in the Park program is a seniors-led walking program, and the idea, again, capacity building and giving training and resources to senior walk leaders who then go out and start their own community walking groups in their parks. There was an emphasis on newcomers, but this program also has been expanded into the GTHA mainly the GTA, Mississauga, Markham, and Brampton this past year, and engaged new Canadians, but some of them have been here. It was also from people born and raised here, seniors in general. And again, this was a way for us to, with our Into the Greenbelt program, outreach and layer some program deliverables, as well as layer our connections in the community by having these leaders, both our walk leaders and our Sparking Change community leaders, using them to network and also sort of spread the word of mouth to get this opportunity out and to also help coordinate the events. And it has been quite successful being able to layer that way. Sorry, challenges that we have experienced, and there are a few, but some challenges is primarily the finances. So given the fact that a bus trip, renting a bus is over, it depends, depending on how far you go, it can be upwards of 500 plus, depending, especially if they're a Toronto-based group and they're heading all the way out into the Hamilton area to explore, again, a Greenbelt destination. So many community groups did find that as a big barrier, and especially if they wanted to provide, depending on the location, if it had associated entrance fees on top of the sort of the travel expenses. So we encourage as much as possible for groups to either combine or work with each other and kind of piggyback on top of some of their funds, so they could make it maybe like a larger group to go out and pool their resources together. Also work with them to find locations that were, for example, like Rouge National Urban Park, that did not have an entrance fee and they could either access via transit if they were Toronto based, or other places that provided a much more subsidized or group rate entrance, which had been also quite successful. And we also do help with some additional fundraising if we can. That's what has been the benefit of layering this program with our Sparking Change and our Walk in the Park program, given that both of those programs provide funding to some of the community leaders. So it was a way for them to sort of offset some additional expenses by layering with that. And partnership development requires time. So for anybody who's interested in starting engaging new audiences and starting new programs for a new demographic or a new audience, it just bear in mind it takes time to cultivate those relationships. Being in the nonprofit world, it's often tied to funding deadlines, but realizing that those aren't always as realistic as in terms of your deliverables that you need to get. So as much as possible, partnering with groups and really trying to share your resources and sharing your expertise across different fields is super, super important. So words of advice, yeah, go slow and take your time if you can. Work with an established social service agency in your community to sort of help with that outreach and network, to get groups and to get individuals interested and engaged in your programming. It's always great to have a community leader or a community champion who can either provide translation or who could also provide just general support and helping to know when about timing, when people meet, and when it would be the best time to take trips. Having that local expert is really, really important when you're starting a new program or wanting to make it as inclusive and safe for people to join. And listen and refine the program based on the community needs. Can't stress that enough. It really does take time, but it also is super, super important for the success of your program overall. And I think one benefit of the Into the Greenbelt program, we're now in the third year, pre-COVID, was really, it's really about refining it and working with those community leaders. And again, they're the ones that can help us find destinations that are suitable for their needs, that would be inspiring, engaging, and overall fun. Because at the end of the day, we want people on these field trips to have fun, to appreciate the value of the Greenbelt, and get outdoors and engage with nature. And for many, it's their first time experiencing nature outside of the city. So it's been a great program to run. We did offer it last year. You can see the little girl with the magnifying glass. She's from one of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada. We partnered with them as well with the Greenbelt Foundation last year to deliver some of these bursary field trips to their summer camp programs. And again, it was a nice layering and diversification of the programming that they already offered. And it was an audience that was already engaged and ready to go. And it was providing them with that opportunity to just go out and have fun in they were at Port Wright Center, actually, in that particular picture. So that's it for me in a nutshell. I apologize for the technical challenge there, and I look forward to connecting with everybody in the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Jill. That was great. We'll move on to Ashoo in a second. I just want to remind everyone about the Q&As to please put them in the Q&A box. I'm seeing some questions in the chats. And if you have questions that are specific to a presenter, I should have mentioned this earlier, so this is my fault, but just note who you are asking if it's not a general question. Okay, great. Take it away, Ashoo.
Okay. Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Jill and Anna for setting such a beautiful stage for the discussion that we are engaging today. How to connect with our new Canadian partners here. Let me just see. Everybody can see? Good to go? Okay. So yeah, so thank you again for this opportunity. I'm so feeling so grateful in these unprecedented times to be still doing partly of what I do in my everyday life, talking about and building these connections with the new immigrants coming into Canada. So I'm feeling very, very blessed. Okay, so I'm going to build a little bit more upon what Jill and Anna had started about, talking about, how to connect these people with nature and what are some of the barriers and what we have been doing at the Credit Valley Conservation in the last decade or so. So I'll start with our base camp. So this is the little map of Credit Valley Conservation. We are 1,000 square kilometer of a watershed with a very diverse population base in Mississauga, Brampton, Georgetown, and now even Caledon and Orangeville are becoming very diverse as well. Credit River starts from Orangeville and it meets the Lake Ontario near Port Credit area. And this was the face for the longest time that we had who were our environmental stewards in the watershed. A very homogeneous, traditional population that was already, engaged and connected with nature. And then it changed. as hinted in the presentation by Anna and Jill, that majority of Torontonians are now identifying themselves as visible minorities. So this demographic phase change was a very big reason for the Credit Valley Conservation to start developing a program to engage these new stewards that we want to be connected with natural area in our watershed. So in 2009, the Multicultural Outreach Program was started at Credit Valley Conservation, and I was appointed to run the program. So my first few days, few weeks were spent in trying to figure out how to begin. Where should we start this engagement process? I connected with my fellow colleagues at TRCA because their program had already was going on at that time, and kind of got some headways there. And then we started to build this program. And the first thing that I kind of figured was that the city parks in our GTA, they are sold off tickets. On any given weekend, if you want to go and spend time in these parks, you will see a lot of diversity of people there having fun with families and friends, barbecuing, and all sorts of activities going on. But when it comes to natural areas, when it comes to conservation areas, when it comes to areas that are a little away from the city but are have abundance of nature in it, they were an alien concept for most of the immigrants and the organizations that we worked with. They had no idea, first of all, what is a conservation area, and then what you can do in a conservation area was also, a very far-fetched idea for most of the people that we connected with in the beginning. So even for the immigrants who have been living in our watershed for maybe 30 years, 20 years, a lot of teachers that we worked with who have been teaching in our watershed for a very long time, they were also not aware of what conservation areas are. So the lack of awareness, which was also brought up in another presentation today, is one of the very big reasons why people are not able to connect with the natural areas. Because if you don't know what they are, what you can do, how will you connect? So some of the key things that I learned early on was it is very important to know your audiences. It is very important to strike a chord with the people that you are trying to engage. Trying to learn who they are, what they do, know where they are coming from, what they like to eat. Even food is a very important element because food brings so many, interesting discussions, and from those discussions, you don't know what kind of beautiful projects will spin out. And how do they interact? And how do they, most importantly, relate to environment? I remember in one of my very first meetings with a director from a settlement agency who are one of our very big community partners. He said that you need to understand that these people are very busy in their everyday life, because when an immigrant comes to Canada, they spend their first 5 years in settling down in Canada, which requires them to even learn English. It requires them to find a job, find a good neighborhood to live in. All those parameters keep them away from environmental radar. Environment is not on their mind. They're not thinking about them. But that doesn't mean that they're not connected with environment. So they do have the spark. We just need to find out how to ignite them. So we have to figure out some non-traditional ways, non-traditional places to connect with them. The very first program that we had built for engagement was doing an environment and nature week in a library. It was never done before, and the idea that came to us from was because the emergency services in city of Brampton was running a week of providing information to folks in the library, and we thought that why can't we bring environment? Emergency is environment and is important, and environment is equally important. And those people were there, and the library manager was very supportive with the idea. So having a supportive community partner, as Jill had mentioned, goes a very long way in developing these programs. And we started that program, we ran that program for 5 years in different libraries in our watershed. And most of the time we would connect with more than 200 people in a week with different environmentally themed workshops that we would bring to them. So very important to know your audiences. Generating interest. So we had to figure out why would, if we go and build a really nice marketing campaign that, okay, we're doing a beautiful hike in a beautiful conservation area, please join us. We have to find out what will interest them, which is very, very important. So I'll share with you a story which I learned in the very beginning of my career with Credit Valley. There was a lot of dumping in the neighborhoods, in one of the neighborhoods in Surrey that the city of Surrey was experiencing. So this particular neighborhood was a South Asian neighborhood, and the dumping would include anything from computers, the desktop computers would be thrown in the river. There would be tables and chairs, lots of furniture, all sorts of stuff people would throw in their neighborhood, on the trails, in the river, in the backyards. And the city had been working for a long time in trying to control this behavior, but nothing was happening. So they partnered with Evergreen, and Evergreen and the city of Surrey came up with a campaign where they built a brochure. It was a two-sided brochure. On one side, it was the messaging was in Punjabi, which was the dominant language of the neighborhood, and the other side, they had the information in English. So, but rather than doing a traditional environmental messaging that, okay, clean your neighborhood, come and do tree planting with us, they did a little spin on that. What they said in that messaging was, clean your neighborhood because it will increase the price value of your house. They said, clean your neighborhood because it will bring health to you. It'll be making your health of your children, of your family really nice. Mentally and physically you'll feel better. With those two messaging predominant in that brochure, the city started to see a huge change in the behavior pattern of people. So the reason I wanted to share this story is that because we have to, the property value change was and being healthy was those two were very good messaging that kind of got the attention of the South Asian community there in big time, and the neighborhood started to clean up very beautifully. So we really need to find out what interests people. Another thing to understand is another story, okay, to tell is there's an organization in GTA called Afghan Women's Organization. It's a predominantly Muslim women organization. When we go do presentations there, the requirement is that the presenter has to be a woman. Men are not allowed there. There's nobody who's not a woman working in that organization. So when we are trying to engage with these partners, we need to understand these nuances. So if I have a male colleague and we would recruit him to go and do a presentation, we'll do a lot of damages to our already established partnership with such organizations. So understanding the needs of your community groups and understanding what would interest them is very, very important. Location is a very old phrase, but it is very, very important. So this is the picture from one of the sessions we did in Environment and Nature Week in a Brampton library. These were the people who, when they first came, they had no idea that they were coming for a presentation. They were there just to drop a book or pick up a book or help or finding help for their kids. But there was samosas in the event, so that was a big draw. And then the other thing was they saw this beautiful big environment like rivers and flowers and all those posters around, and they got interested. They walked up to us and they asked, what are we doing? And then we told them, though, we are talking about gardening today, and they got interested and they wanted to spend that 20 minutes to listen to what we are doing. Over the next 5 years, they knew exactly what CVC was, what Credit Valley Conservation meant. And in that 5 years, we built a very strong bond with the community. But if I was to offer the same program in another location, say in a conservation area or somewhere else, it will not have that success because people didn't know. So we have to go to places where these people meet and greet, because that's where we will build super connections. Communication is the key. Yes, it is the key. How and what you are saying is very, very important. So for the longest time, this was our slogan, caring for the credit. I'm sure everybody in this group who's listening to this will know exactly what I'm talking about. But now let's change the hats. Let's take this slogan to a new immigrant who's coming to Canada, who's been here for 5 months, and now he's reading or she's reading this slogan, caring for the credit. What are they going to understand? I was in a Sikh temple doing an outreach program in the very beginning of my job here at Credit Valley Conservation. And we had these slogans and beautiful images of river and flowers and gardens. And then a lot of people, about 4,000 people, crossed path in that evening. There was a very big event there. And many people came and asked me from which bank I was coming, what kind of credit card I was giving. And I was stunned because I was also new in my position. I said, I don't know, what am I doing that people are coming and asking this question. But later in the evening when I was going home, it clicked me. I said, okay, I said, this is not going to work. Then I went back and I told my director, I said, you know what? This is not going to work. We have to change this slogan if we want to do outreach with the new Canadians, because caring for the credit, because it's a double meaning word. So we have to change this to caring for the credit river, so that people know that the name of the river is the credit. Many people in our neighborhoods, in our watershed, they have no clue that the name of the river that's flowing behind their houses is credit. So how will they connect to such messaging? So very, very important to understand what we are saying. So caring for the credit river was the better option. Keeping your language simple is also very important. Using words, native, invasive species, invertebrates, predator, they are very heavy words. So simplifying your messaging is also key. These words resonate with us in the environmental community, but we have to think about people who are coming from different cultures where maybe they have never heard about invasive species. Avoid using TLAs. If it was a live session, I would have asked somebody if they know what TLAs are, but I'll say it now. So TLAs are 3-letter acronyms. So when I go and I talk to my audience and I say, I work for CVC as your MC, and here we are to talk to you about our program CYC, I will lose them. I will lose the connection because they have no idea what CVC is. So avoid using those is a very, very important messaging and communication when communicating with our audience. Be open to learn from other cultures and traditions. It is very, very important. Often we think that we are in the environmental profession and we know much more than the people that we work with. But sometimes just because we don't know the other cultures very well, we can lose the interest that is already in there if we do a wrong communication or miss on the communication. I'll give you another example. A lot of people from the South Asian community are coming from a state called Punjab in India. Now, Punjab is a green belt in India. It was the breadbasket for a very long time that supported the country. So a lot of people coming from there even now are traditionally landowners. They are like, they have huge lands and they have lived their lives on farms. But when they come here to Canada, they get connected not with the farming traditions, but they get into the service industry mostly. And then, so they do have the spark. We just need the right ignition. They value nature, land in many, many folds, which we don't understand. So trying to understand those traditions from other cultures is also very, very important learning experiences when we're building programs. People have different experiences around the globe. So just again, trying to understand their experiences. Sustainability practices differ. We love to do recycling in Canada. And likewise, there are many other countries and cultures that do recycling, but maybe they do it differently. So just trying to again understand, what are those practices. Be aware of verbal and non-verbal cross-cultural signs and communications. In many cultures, shaking hands is a very big no-no. Or there could be other hidden cultural nuances that can actually sway people away or bring them closer to you. So keeping a tap on that is also a key. So now I'll just quickly go over some of the barriers. So one of the primary one is the lack of awareness. People have minimal or no connection with local natural areas. So we have to build that awareness. Language is also, for many newcomers who are coming into Canada, is a huge barrier. For many immigrant families, a 10, 12-year-old kid in the house is the best interpreter that they have. So keeping your messaging to that level is another important consideration. Transportation to our conservation areas is also a huge barrier, as Jill had also hinted in her presentation. So most of our conservation areas are not connected on transit lines. They are very far away from transit. So for people to access this area, even if we go and advertise, even if we go and build the awareness, but if we don't provide transportation, it'll be very hard for newcomers who are trying to settle in Canada to get to our programs in the conservation areas. Lack of sense of community belonging. So a lot of immigrants, when they come to Canada, they lose their social capital. They lose their social networking that they had in their countries. So when they come to Canada, they have to begin from the ground up to build their connections in the society. So on the weekends, when a traditional Canadian would be going for a hike in the Greenbelt, these people would be probably busy building those connections. Because Monday to Friday they'll work, and then weekends they will try to connect and build this, because in the times of happiness and sadness, they will need these people. So they have to spend time building these connections. So keeping that in mind, so a good way to do is to do a community kind of engagement, so that people they are trying to bond with and themselves, they all can come to your programs together. Fear for natural outdoors is a very inherent a fear in most of the new Canadians who are coming for, especially from war-torn areas. People who are coming from refugee scenarios, they have a lot of bad memories of being in natural areas, and those become a deterrent in engaging or connecting them with nature. So be cognizant about that, and then how to overcome this, how to inform that being outside in nature in Canada is very different than maybe their experiences that they had in their countries. So maybe alone they might not be able to be comfortable, but maybe if you bring their whole bus of their community, they will have a gala time. Physical activity in new immigrants is a barrier in accessing again natural areas or nature in general, just because they come initially, they come and they are involved in 2 or 3 jobs at a time, which takes away a lot of their time, and they're not able to get away from that and get engaged in physical activity in nature or elsewhere. Physical activity within women in the newcomers community is further low, just because they have these family obligations of taking care of the family and often extended families. In many cultures, women are not even allowed to explore outdoors without the company of a male companion. So keeping those things in mind is also very, very important when we're building our programs for them. Social and cultural norms are definitely a very big consideration, because if you once we had a program that we were running in the library, and as I said before, that mostly 200-250 people would show up. That particular week we had only 35 attendance. And then when we look back, so that program was booked in the week when people were celebrating Diwali. Diwali is a festival that people celebrate, Hindus celebrate all over the world, but most of the people are engaged for 4 to 5 days of festivities. So that whole week, people were not interested in whatever programming we were bringing to them. So keeping those cultural norms. Similar would be true for Ramadan. If you're organizing a program or tree planting event and Ramadan is going on and people are fasting, people will not show up. So then brings us to that $1,000,000 question. What programs to offer? So in a nutshell, programs that are language appropriate, simple, programs that can fit into the cultural norms of the people that you're trying to engage, programs that are sensitive to the religious and the cultural needs of our clients. Seniors inclusive programming, that's another really good point, because one of the library managers that I worked with, she in the very beginning of my career here, had mentioned that seniors is one big community of immigrants that is usually very isolated. A lot of seniors or parents come to Canada, try to take care of their grandkids, and that becomes their main occupation. And that also, disconnects them from the other part of the life in Canada, because they don't know English, they cannot drive, so they are very, very isolated. So building programming around seniors is very, very important, and that's why Credit Valley Conservation since 2012 has been offering, health and wellness programs for seniors, and our demand for these programs have been growing a lot. No transportation costs. Yes, very, very important. So we have been very fortunate that we were able to support our programs by not asking for any transportation costs from our clients. And that is the reason we have been able to connect more than 25,000 people over the last 10 years with nature, because transportation is a very, very big barrier. No gate fee, park fee, yes, very, very important again. So if we can make those concessions, we'll be able to connect more people, or if we can find funding to support those. And creating a social environment for them, very important. We can't bring a group of people, say a bus load of people to Terracotta, and ask them to go on a hike and then just go home. That will be a very devastating experience, because this is their opportunity to connect with nature, and when they are in the known company of their networks, they thrive in these environments. We have groups that had come to our parks and done ball dancing. They would bring their costumes, and after the hike, after their lunch, they would go do ball dancing. So that is the kind of environment and connectivity that we need to provide, so that people go back with really good memories and a commitment to come back and connect with nature. That brings me to the end. I'm going to stop share here. Thank you so very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Ashoo. That was great. So we're a little bit over time, as I promised. So if you need to go, that's fine. I think we'll take another 10 minutes for questions. So we'll end up at the time that was advertised after all. So we'll start with a couple questions here, and I'll just answer a couple of general questions I saw come up here and in the chat. We are recording this webinar, and I can share the slides and the recording when we send a follow-up email after this webinar, so you will get that. Okay, so the first question we have here is how to balance introducing new Canadians to these natural places while balancing crowds. For example, what has happened on Bruce Peninsula and the Grotto. Does anyone have any thoughts on that one? I can start. this is definitely a conversation that we're having quite a bit internally as we're looking at specifically in the Greenbelt, certain those places like the Grotto that have a lot of traffic on it. And it's a great question. I think in our conversations with a lot of partners, this is something that's coming up a lot, is like, how do we, spread out the attention to draw attention to some of those places that are, a little less well known and need the business, and then how do we start to draw it back from those spaces that are overwhelmed. So I think in some of our conversations that we've had with partners, there's some, attempts to take on programming that is, going into the off season, so winters or in the shoulder season. So doing more programming there and encouraging more people to take trips during those seasons, as well as just promoting places that don't get as much attention, and kind of reeling back the promotion on those places that get a lot of attention. So if anyone else has comments, feel free to share them in the chat as well. Or Ashoo or Jill, did you want to comment on that question?
Yeah, I'll go. So I feel that what you brought, Anna, was a really good point, that yes, Bruce Peninsula, those are sold off tickets, Niagara Falls, yes. But I think we really need to develop this awareness campaign where people know that even if they drive for 40 minutes, 45 minutes from where they are in the GTA, they can access some really good, recreational opportunities. I think developing those environmental educational awareness campaigns will be a good way to offset such scenarios.
Great. Second question we had here, did you ask how they plan their trips? I'm assuming this was a question to me, given the time stamp. So in the focus groups, it wasn't so much we asked necessarily how they got there or logistically how they put it together. It's more ask where they get that information from to do trips. So like I mentioned, a lot of those word of mouth recommendations, social media really went into planning their trips. And then that access knowledge barrier that came up was sometimes when they would go to look at these places that they would plan to go to, there wasn't sufficient information about where to park or where to go exactly. So there is some logistical issues with planning the trips. In terms of actually the modes of transportation, by the sounds of a lot of the participants in the focus groups, it's mostly driving. And I know this came up with Jill and Ashoo, is the transportation issue of those who don't have cars or who may not have access to cars all the time. It's not easy to get to a lot of places via public transit or elsewhere. I did notice in the chat Alex from Park Bus plugging in their Park Bus program, which is great. It's a great way to help encourage people who don't have access to cars or who just want to take a bus instead to start to look at those sorts of ways to plan their trips. Anyone else want to add on that point?
Yeah, in terms of the Greenbelt trips, we worked closely with all of the the bursary recipients to find them, to pair them with a busing company, and to help them plan the trips. Though those are slightly different because they are seasonal, with most of the trips going to conservation areas and local farms. So the window of sort of exploration is your May to late fall, maybe November. It's not a all season, which then subsequently lines up with things like summer camp busing. So it can be a little bit challenging to match and find a transportation company that isn't already booked. So when we were planning and working with groups to get them going, we helped them plot out things like round trip destinations. A lot of them wanted to go to some of the further afield destinations and then realized, oh, actually it's going to take us 3 hours to get there. We won't have enough time to enjoy. So just being mindful and going with them in their planning process, and then kind of again finding a suitable alternative or finding a company that would be able to stay with them the full day, especially with a bus, because it's often you rent the bus for the full duration of a day. So it was it takes time, but it's definitely worthwhile in order to make people feel comfortable and then subsequently enjoy their time exploring. the destination.
Okay, another question we had here on the education piece, said any of the areas probed and responses collected focus on learning, e.g. learning about the foodways represented around the Greenbelt, the environment, heritage? So again, this was addressed to me based on the timestamp. We didn't, in the focus groups, we didn't specifically ask about that, but it did came up from the participants that a number of them did have a desire to, you know, have more educational trips, especially since there was indicate a lack of knowledge of the area and the Greenbelt in particular. So having more educational focused trips was desirable. Anyone want to add? No. Okay. Next question. Most of the pictures for South Asian have been female dominant. Any comments on demographics?
I think that was mine, and that's mainly total disclosure because we had photo consent for those for me to be able to use in the presentations. It's not to say that we didn't have different audiences and engaged. It just ended up being that those were the pictures I selected for this presentation. In regards to, though, as Ashoo mentioned, there is a cultural norm to have the same sex gather, in particular with the South Asian community. So a lot of the women, especially older women, who were not taking care of children at the time or grandchildren at the time, were able to gather mid-week. And that was another question in the chat, sort of going around midweek travel. It was able, if you were kind of engaging families, you tended to see those happening more on the weekends, which as the general public would be exploring those places anyways, and it's much more busy. But the midweek was always more, most of the tours tended to be geared towards either groups that would meet, so maybe a social club that would meet, a seniors group that would meet, a women's group that would meet, or a walking club in our case, because we layered a lot of our senior walk leaders, and they went out midweek and they had the availability and time. So there was a balance in the Into the Greenbelt experience from that perspective. But in terms of demographics, we opened it up to all newcomers and seniors and those in priority neighborhoods, which quite often had a big mix. So it just ended up being the pictures that I selected were heavy on females, and I apologize for that. There was no real sort of rhyme. Yeah, I should go ahead.
I would like to add, so in many of our programs, we actually bring a bus load of only South Asian men. So it's a total contrast to what you saw in the pictures. Yeah, because they're all senior, you know, groups, and they're male groups, and they just bring their, you know, cards, and they want to play after their engagement with nature. They want to sit in the corner, just play cards. So I guess, you know, every group that, you know, we work with unique, and we just try to facilitate what interests them apart from, you know, that connection with nature.
Okay, we have a question. Any suggestions for virtual engagement?
Okay, I'll go with that. So I think we're all in our, you know, quarters looking at different, you know, ways to develop that. So New Canadians are a very unique group. So it was much easier maybe for us to develop this webinar and offer it and implement it. But when it comes to New Canadians, as I mentioned, and we all have mentioned in our presentations, language is a barrier, and so is technology. Most of the people that, you know, I've been, you know, working with, we work a lot with ESL schools, which are the English as a second language schools, who have many of these newcomers that we work with, and they are struggling right now. The teachers are struggling. They're using multiple platforms to engage a group of 10 or 14, you know, people. They're using 3 different platforms to make engagement programs for their clients. So it is challenging. But I think Zoom is a really good platform that many organizations are using to engage. So I think developing content which is smaller in length, maybe 20 to 30 minutes, is something that I'm actually getting the feedback would be very appealing for your newcomer audience, and suggesting some hands-on exercises that they can actually do on their own, watch some videos, inspiring videos on their own would be, you know, helpful for virtual engagement.
Can I just jump in quickly? I know we're like right at time. People were having a little trouble there, Ashoo, hearing you. But yeah, so in regards to the platform and engagement during kind of the stage of physical distancing, online platforms are one way to engage audiences. It's not necessarily as inclusive, given that not everybody has access to those resources. For someone was asking in the chat again specifically, and I'm not sure if it was directed to me or not, for the Into the Greenbelt program, but we are speaking with the foundation of ways to adapt and reposition that program in more as a COVID recovery piece, in particular around food insecurity that people are experiencing. So there are ways to sort of engage audiences and still share the message, but in light of COVID, it's really about it's at this point, it's about the recovery piece. And I think as a fundraising piece, that's probably what most fundraising and non-charitable organizations are going to be dealing with, is more of a recovery piece in light of COVID for engagement.
So we are at time. I'll just take maybe 2 more quick questions and then we'll end it off there. And I'll provide my email in the chat box. If anyone has any other burning questions or comments they'd like, just feel free to email me. So we'll just do 2 more. Do new Canadians enjoy equally litter cleanup, tree planting, as well as hikes and outings?
I would say yes, but we just need to, steer them. We just need to have somebody who can actually guide them. In many cultures, doing volunteerism doesn't come naturally to them, and I'm guilty of one. I'm from India, and for 25 years that I lived in India, I never volunteered a single day because I never saw anybody volunteering around me. So but I wanted to volunteer. I volunteer all the time now. So I think they would want to. It's just that we need a steer.
Great. So I'll go for one last question. Your research and future planning, was there consideration given to an appetite for Indigenous content in future involvement? So, yeah.
So we have been recently started to develop a program where we actually feel that there is a very big disconnect between the newcomer audience and demographics and the Indigenous culture. So we are trying, to build or bring things on the same platform so that the awareness for Indigenous culture is built up in the newcomer community. So we're trying to, develop some programs. They're all in the development phase for right now. But yes, we have been thinking about that.
Great. Yes, I know at the from the foundation's perspective, there is definitely we are working with partners to look into Indigenous content and future involvement in that way. Yeah. So I guess I'll end it there. Sorry, we went a little bit over time. Even I don't know what would have happened if we had another presenter. But thank you all for joining today. I put in my email in the chat box there in case you have other questions or comments. Please feel free to reach out to me. And again, just a reminder, we are recording this, and I will share slides after this session. So thank you all so much for joining. And
thank you, everybody. Thank you, Anna, for organizing this. Bye. Yes. Stay safe. Stay home. Bye.
Bye.